Hi, I'm gonna go over because I'm on my second video that I made on dispensation and uh, rightly dividing the word. The reason I'm because I got a phone call and then it didn't record my voice. I didn't know that it did that, but anyway, so I'm gonna go over the part that that didn't go through. So it's the Christians and the Mosaic law. What is important to note that even when Old Testament Jews follow the law, their works are considered imperfect to God. Paul writes that by the deeds of the law there shall no flesh be justified in God's sight. Romans 3:20. For Christians today, we have Jesus' sacrifice on the cross, which is perfect, unlike the works of the law, where now the righteousness of God without the law is manifested by faith of Jesus Christ. Romans 3:21-22. On a side note, this argument is powerful in convincing Jews who subscribe to Old Testament doctrines today that they cannot be saved by their law, but only through Jesus. In fact, Jews today do not even keep the law in their lowering of standards of blood sacrifices and circumcision. They don't even keeping their own laws, which were both necessary in the law. So if you don't believe in Christ, you got to keep that law of the Jews if you're a Jew. This also debunks the hyper-dispensational argument that there is nothing applicable for the Christian in the Old Testament, because Christians can use this comparison with the Old Testament to show Jews their failure of works and need of a perfect salvation by faith in the Lord. Exactly, because they're failing, they're not doing any works, Apart from the Mosaic law comparison, a Christian can also use the example of David as an example, as an exception to salvation. Excuse me. But as an exception to salvation by works. He broke the law of Moses in committing adultery and murder. He deserved death, yet was spared by God. Paul writes that David was a man unto whom God imputed righteousness without works. Romans 4:6. This did not mean, however, that he disregarded the truth during his time of both faith and works being required for salvation, as seen throughout Psalms about David's relationship with God. Because if you read those Psalms about David, he was a man after God's own heart. And he repented most of the time. So, but anyway. It also left off the prosperity gospel. Notice that physical prosperity for the Jews was evoked by their physical works. 1 Kings 2:3. There is a hearsay regarding this called the prosperity gospel that you should avoid. Modern preachers such as Joel Osteen say that if you give money to God and do physical good works, God will richly bless your life. Well, he ain't the only one that got, the only pastor and preacher going saying that. Even the majority of Christians, this holds untrue. Many Christians serve God rightly and find greater hardship and suffering instead of success. But the main problem with this teaching is that they are taking a doctrine meant for a different time period and a different group of people, Old Testament Jews, and applying it wrongly. Okay. Signs and wonders for the Jew. Since God physically dealt with physical Jews, he had to prove his power by way of physical signs and wonders. God gave the Jews signs through Moses with the intent being that they may believe in him. Exodus 4:1-9. And that's why there's signs and wonders. So anyway, this is just, I just went over the ones where, in that one video where it got cut off. But anyway, you all know what I'm talking about. God bless you.